Today, I'd like to present some reflections on a survey that was recently done about the issue of sex abuse in the Catholic Church. One of the things that intrigues a lot of people is, well, what is the effect of all of the revelations about sex abuse in the church on the people in the church? Certainly, we know the effect on the victims, and we pray for the victims and offer help to the victims. Just a horrible situation. And certainly, we've heard a lot about the priest aspect of it. But many people say, well, this crisis, this abuse that's happened, these terrible revelations, the horrible situation, how has it affected the average Catholic? What do they think about it? What do they think caused it? Has it affected their faith life? What are some of the impacts on them? So recently, from May 21st to June 4th, the CARA, the group that does research on the apostolate from Georgetown University, they, in conjunction with America Magazine, did a survey of 1,050 Catholics, and the responses to those questions to that survey gives us a little bit of an insight into what your average Catholic might be thinking about this situation and how it has impacted them. Interestingly, the question was asked about, well, what caused this? And of course, hard for everybody to know exactly. I mean, there's so many different situations and circumstances. But the responses to that, in terms of what particularly caused it, were the vast majority of them, or the highest number, 23%. So they really don't know what caused it, and they're still trying to discover it and fathom what caused it. Then 22% of those surveyed felt it was the celibacy that caused it. So this whole idea of the vow of celibacy has been really questioned a lot, talked about a lot. And some people are of the opinion that, well, if priests did not take this vow, maybe there would be less abuse. Certainly that is a consideration. The next largest group thought maybe it was the church leadership and the decisions, the cover-up, because really, as bad as the abuse situation was, and it was horrible and a terrible thing, many people will say even worse was trying to cover this situation up. Why not just come out, talk honestly and openly about it? Why do all this cover-up stuff? And then the fourth largest response, as we said, the highest, 23% don't know, 22% celibacy, 18% church leadership, and then 15%, well, it was bad priests. Priests who really did not live up to certainly their vows, probably should not have taken those vows, been involved with priesthood, that maybe that was the reason that these priests were just bad priests, and they caused this. So when you look at the average Catholic in terms of that response, you say, well, I think they are still struggling to find the cause of it ultimately. What was it exactly that caused this in terms of the Catholic Church? No real definitive, clear-cut answer comes out, but certainly celibacy, the cover-ups by the bishops, certainly these are important factors. Questions were also asked about, well, what is the role of the news media in this? And the vast majority said that the news media seem to present fairly and accurately. And really that is the situation, because when you look at it, it's the revelations that got out into the news media and the reporting that was done that really brought it to everyone's attention. A lot of it had been hidden. A lot of the agreements that even the victims signed were non-disclosure agreements where they were supposed to keep it quiet. And that was really the whole thrust of many of the bishops who dealt with this situation, was really they didn't want to cause scandal. They wanted to keep it quiet. And as we know, that resulted, unfortunately, in more scandal and not really dealing with it openly so that people could really assess it and really get the help to those who needed the help, certainly the victims. Uh, Also, the survey revealed certain misconceptions about the crisis. The first was the idea that priests were more likely than others to abuse. And as we've seen from a lot of the statistics, priests abuse really at the same rate as those in other professions. So it's not really something that is, you know, a larger problem among priests. It's certainly a problem across the board. Perhaps the way the problem was dealt with, certainly that issue could be raised in terms of the priesthood, but certainly just in terms of the overall numbers, the misconception out there is that the priests have a higher rate of abusing than those in other professions, which is not accurate. And another misconception was that there is more abuse now than there was in the past. And actually, from 2015 to 2019, there were only 59 cases that were reported, basically 12 per year. So the number has gone down dramatically, and that's because certainly of all the precautions the church has taken and all the awareness of this issue. It certainly it's there. It hasn't gone away completely, but it certainly is not at the level of the thousands and hundreds of cases that we've seen in the past. Now, one of the most interesting things to me is, well, what about the effect of the abuse in terms of your average Catholic? You know, how has it impacted them in terms of their faith life? And when you look at that, um, to continue being raised in the Catholic faith, the idea of that, has it impacted their willingness? And 36% said yes, that really it has impacted them in terms of that. To attend church, 30% felt that way. To become altar servers, 30% said that it affected them, that they would not consider that was an impact. To consider a vocation, 29%. To attend religious education, 29%. To attend church-sponsored youth groups, 28%. To attend Catholic schools, 27%. So you can see from these types of responses that the abuse crisis has really impacted people in terms of the decisions they're making, in terms of attending the local parish, and in terms of also attending church-sponsored activities, that people in general are certainly much more reluctant, much more aware of the negative possibilities that can happen, much more guarded in terms of that. So that certainly is a very real and dramatic impact in terms of the church. Also, in terms of, well, what is the most helpful thing that the church has offered? And that was very interestingly discussions, open discussions that the parishes and church institutions sponsored. So the idea of dealing with it openly, of discussing it, people found that extremely helpful. So again, a good thing for the church to do. Also acknowledging what happened, being open and honest. And then also offering classes and trainings was extremely helpful, and then offering therapy for people who needed therapy. So, in a lot of ways, what the church has tried to do is be aware, certainly, of the situation, face it much more openly and honestly than they had in the past. Uh, Very interestingly, too, in the survey was brought out the trainings that the church offers in terms of abuse for volunteers has had a tremendous impact. About 90% have responded favorably to them and said that it's good that the church offers them and that they were very helpful. So when you look at it, certainly some of the steps the church has taken have been very positive and extremely helpful. When you look at in terms of who the Catholics now find very trustworthy in terms of the church, it's interesting that the number one group that Catholics turn to is the nuns and religious sisters. They seem to find that these are the people who are more trustworthy, say, than my local priests, my local bishops. These are the people that really kind of, if I had a question or if I had a problem or if I wanted to discuss it, I would turn to first. One of the things that struck me about this too is in terms of mass attendance. Um, and one of the interesting findings is that presently, when they surveyed that basically 21% of Catholics attend Mass. Uh, when you look back to 2007, when the survey was done, it was exactly the same number, 21%. So even with the abuse crisis, even with the scandal, even with a lot of the inadequacies in terms of cover up and how it was dealt with initially, mass attendance has stayed about the same, which is surprising. You would think that it would impact it very much and that less people would be attending, but really it has stayed about the same. So, what do we learn from the survey? We learn that there are certainly misconceptions about it among Catholics. We learn that it has certainly deeply impacted Catholics. We learned that the Catholics were very upset, certainly about how it was handled initially. But we also learn that there are signs that the way the church is dealing with it now is much more helpful to people having those discussions. That certainly it is not as prevalent a problem as it was in the past. That is the way the church is handling it now is a big improvement, certainly. And we learn that in terms of mass attendance, it really hasn't impacted the church that dramatically. Certainly, as you look at the whole crisis, my take on it would be certainly that the church made a huge error in the way it dealt with it. Um, and the church needs to do more, obviously, to promote healing among those who were abused. And that really should be at the core of our mission. We're a healing church. And so those who have been hurt by this, we owe them support. We owe them our love. We owe them our ongoing offers of therapy and counseling. That certainly should be primary. And we should be open in our discussions with our people about it and continue our efforts as we have been doing in terms of screening volunteers, screening paid professionals, screening the clergy, very important, and our monitoring. We have to be active in our monitoring of all of our parish programs. And all of these things taken together will hopefully eliminate this awful, awful, terrible situation of abuse and make our church what it should be, really, which is a healing church representing the love and compassion of Jesus.